Reggie here, and I want to welcome you to another one of my videos. In this video, we are going to attempt to answer some questions about 9.8s. There are some people that believe that all 9.8s are created equally, and I can tell you that that is not the case. There are folks out there that struggle with the premium price that a 9.8 will command. Some folks don't quite understand why a 9.6 is worth less, and so much less in many cases, than a 9.8. My goal with this video is to potentially answer some of those questions and maybe give you a few things to think about as you evaluate whether you want to buy a 9.8 or not. If you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, I want to invite you to do so because the mission here is to help you become smarter about the hobby of comic book collecting. At a minimum, I hope you enjoyed this video. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of examples. And we are first going to look at some superficial things related to 9.8s, and then we're going to dig into some math and some actual data around 9.8s. But one of the first things that I have to highlight is that not all 9.8s are created equally when you think about the eye appeal and desirability of these comics. And on screen, what you see here is a gorgeous copy of X-Men issue number 101. This is a fantastic copy, and as you can see, it has received a grade of a 9.8. And this is a really great example of this book, but I want you to pay close attention to the spine. Pay close attention to the spine of this book. What you'll notice is that there is generally an even amount of white that is shown on the very edge of this book. This book is centered, it is balanced, it is a beautiful 9.8. So let's go ahead and contrast that to another 9.8 that may not have the exact same eye appeal as the one that we just looked at. Unfortunately, this photo isn't as nice as the last, but what you see here is another 9.8. This one has a lot more white on that left-hand side. And believe it or not, for some people, this will impact the desirability of this copy of X-Men issue number 101. Yes, they are both 9.8s with white pages, but because of that white on that left-hand side, some folks will view this book as being less desirable than the other. And I can tell you that there are other 9.8s that do not have an even amount of white the way that this one has. It'll be a little skewed even more than what you see here. And again, it can still get a 9.8. But again, because some folks have this idea of having a perfectly centered and balanced comic, this one will not be as desirable as the first one that I showed. And I'll show you another quick example of this. And again, this is a little superficial, but this does play into why some folks will pay a little bit more for one book versus another book, despite the fact that they are both 9.8s. So on screen now, we have a really nice example of New Mutants issue number 98, the first appearance of Deadpool. This is a really cool book. This is also a book that has notorious issues with how the cover is actually cut. And I want you to pay attention here to the top. To the top of this book, you see that the words the new are right on the screen. There's enough of space headroom above this title. You'll also notice down at the bottom, Copycat's foot is cut off at the very bottom. Now, again, 9.8 white pages, gorgeous book, no doubt about it. So I want to show you another example here of another 9.8. And there are some folks out there that know exactly, potentially what I'm about to point out. But you look here at this one, and what you notice is that the top of the words, the new, is a little truncated. It is a little truncated at the very top. This impacts the eye appeal and desirability of this book, despite the fact that it too is a 9.8. I should also point out that this one has off-white pages, but that is beside the point. It is indeed a 9.8. And then down here at the bottom, you can see all of Copycat's foot. And it's not cut off at the bottom because, again, they gave that headroom at the very top to make perfect room for her foot. So again, I just wanted to kind of show that again, not all 9.8s are created essentially the same. Even though they can have the same grade, they don't always have the same desirability. And again, because of that centering factor, there are some people that will want that perfectly centered, that perfect cover, no white or even white, whatever it happens to be, foot on, foot off, right? Or not truncated at the top. That does affect the desirability. Even if you don't buy graded books, you may want to look for that type of stuff when you happen to be buying raw copies as well. Some folks will get the raw book and send it in to be graded. Just things that you want to be aware of. So let's get to some of the less superficial stuff. Let's get to that. And we are going to look at a couple of examples of some books here that are 9.8s, and we want to be able to compare and contrast some of these books to better understand what is happening with them. And the very first book that we're going to look at is Something is Killing the Children, issue number 1. Fantastic book, there is no doubt about it, but we are going to dig into some numbers here. So I'm going to zoom in on this so you guys can see this a little bit better, and we're going to be taking a look at a couple of numbers for Something is Killing the Children, issue number 1, and for all the other examples that we're going to look at. So the first thing that we want to look at here is the census count for the 9.8. There are 1,976 copies of this comic at a 9.8 on the CGC census. And we can look up here to see how many universal copies, how many blue labels there are. There are 2,780 of them. And if you were to do the math, what you would see is that not roughly, but I think exactly 71% of the total graded blue labels out there are a 9.8. That is a healthy percentage of the total 9.8s out there. Healthy percentage of the total books, for that matter, to be honest with you. This book at a 9.8 has a fair market value of $775. And so we're not going to drill into the 30-day. It gets a little messy when we start to drill in, but we're going to just look at the F&V here. So again, when you dig into it, 71% of the copies out there are a 9.8. That is a lot of copies that happen to be a 9.8. And what I also want you to notice here is that when you look at the 9.6, there is a lot fewer copies of the 9.6 versus the 9.8. There are 555 of them on the census, and you can see the fair market value for this book is about $400. The delta, the percent difference between the 9.6 and the 9.8 is about 64%, just looking at the FMV. And what you'll notice is that as the books become more rare, that percent difference between the 9.8 and the 9.6 actually grows. And we'll illustrate that here in just a moment. But this is a book that potentially says that the 9.8 maybe shouldn't command a premium price. It maybe shouldn't be as expensive as it is. Again, 71% of the copies that are out there are actually a 9.8. That is a lot of books. So let's go ahead and take a look at another example. And this will be another example of a book where there are a lot of 9.8s. It's another good book, but a lot of copies of 9.8s. This is Edge of Spider-Verse, issue number 2, the first appearance of Gwen Stacy as Spider-Woman. So let's go ahead and blow this one up so we can see the data here. And again, what you'll see is that there are 6,623 universal blue labels out there. And when we look at the 9.8, what we notice is that there are 3,318 copies that are a 9.8. That is about 50%. About 50% of the blue label graded copies are a 9.8. That again is a lot of copies. And you'll notice that there is a value delta here between the 9.8 and the 9.6. The FMV for the 9.8 is $1,200. The FMV for the 9.6 is $625. And the census count for the 9.6 is 1,865. The percent difference in value between the 9.6 and the 9.8 is 63%. Both this book and the last book have a value delta of about 60 some odd percent, and that percent will grow as we look at the next couple of examples. But again, another book where potentially the premium price for the 9.8 may not be warranted when you think about it. It's not exactly a rare book. In the case of Edge of Spider-Verse, 50% of the copies out there are a 9.8. When you look at, again, Something is Killing the Children, 71% of them are a 9.8. Not exactly rare copies at all. So let's go ahead and take a look at another example where we start to see a little bit of a shift. We're going to see a little bit of a shift here with another modern classic. This is Ultimate Fallout issue number 4, the first appearance of Miles Morales. This is a cool book. There is no doubt about it. Let me blow this up a little bit more so you guys can see this. All right, so what we're looking at here is we are looking at a lot more copies than what we just saw with the previous two. There are 15,000 universal blue labels of Ultimate Fallout issue number 4 out there. And when you dig into it, what you see, 3,900 of those are a 9.8 with an FMV of $1,900. And the percent is 26% only, and I use this term loosely because of what we just looked at. Only 26% of the copies out there are a 9.8 blue label. 26%, so a much smaller percent, even though the number of total copies is much larger than what we just saw with the previous two examples. And when you look at the value delta, you see the value delta between the 9.6 and the 9.8 actually grow. And again, we're just doing this off of the FMV because it's just a little simpler for us to do it. The FMV for the 9.8, $1,900. For the 9.6, $725. The value delta jumps to 90%. The value delta jumps to 90%, but you also notice, look at the census count. The census count for the 9.6 for the first time in this video is larger than that of the 9.8. So you have a little bit more rarity with your 9.8 overall, and certainly in contrast to the 9.6, which might be why you see the value delta jump up to 90% between the 9.8 and the 9.6. Interesting data point here. So let's look at another example. Let's look at another example where we're going to see that delta, I think, grow even more. I think the deltas will grow more with this. This is a cool book, man. This is G.I. Joe. G.I. Joe, The Real American Hero, issue number 1. Really, really cool book that I have in the collection. Let's zoom in on this one. What you see is that there are 5,995 universal blue label copies out there. The 9.8 represents, or the 9.8 has 861 total copies out there, which is 14%, just 14% of the overall total of universal blue labels, a much smaller number. It's FMV, $1,000 right here. When you look at the 9.6, again, more 9.6s than 9.8s. The census count for the 9.6, 1,282. It's FMV, $325. The value delta between the 9.8 and the 9.6 goes up to 102%. Again, 9.8, rare book versus the overall total. And then when you look at the 9.6, there's more 9.6s than there are 9.8s. And I will tell you that this 102% delta is a little bit of an anomaly. It's a little bit of an anomaly here, and I think the reason for that is because the census count is relatively small versus the overall total of books that are out there. And this isn't exactly a new book. It's not exactly a new book, and we'll contrast that to what you saw previously and what you're going to see next, which is this next one is really interesting, and we basically stopped at 5 examples, but I think there's some good stuff here that hopefully people can leverage. So this next one is a classic. Amazing Spider-Man issue number 300, the first full appearance of Venom. Just finished watching Venom a short while ago on the streaming platform. But when we zoom in here, look at the total number of copies. Total number of Universal Blue Labels, 26,832 copies on the CGC census. When you look at the 9.8, tiny. 1,409 total copies of this book at a 9.8 on the census. That is 5.25% of the total blue labels that are out there. Tiny amount. Look at the value. Look at the fair market value for this book, which is potentially a combination of the fact that its census count is relatively small, the popularity of Spider-Man and Venom is high. The FMV for this book, $4,300. $4,300. When we look at the 9.6, the census count, larger, definitely larger, 3,900. 3,949 9.6s. It has an FMV of $1,500. $1,500, and the value delta in the FMVs between the 9.8 and the 9.6, 97%. I expected that value delta to be larger than G.I. Joe. That was a little bit of a surprise, but again, G.I. Joe, it has a small absolute number of 9.8 out there at 861 copies. It has also a smaller census count overall, and I think potentially that's why that percent value delta between the 9.6 and 9.8 might be a little bit larger, and then again larger than Amazing Spider-Man 300. At least that's how I'm trying to rationalize it. So definitely some interesting things happening in the data. It was really interesting as I was pulling these books and started to analyze them and saw how they kind of stacked up. Maybe this answers some questions out there as to why 9.8's command premiums, why some shouldn't command a premium, why some command a premium versus the 9.6. Not all 9.8s are created equally. There is no doubt about that. I think some additional analysis should be done, and maybe I'll take the time to actually do it. But 5 books, some really interesting takeaways, at least in my mind. I hope that you all enjoyed this video, and if you did, I definitely want to encourage you all to give the video a thumbs up. If you had any epiphanies and thoughts, be certain to leave those behind down in the comment section, because I do enjoy reading the comments. And if you want to reach out to me, feel free to do so on Instagram at Regie Collects. Take care.
This thing on? Mic check. I just want to make sure y'all can hear me clearly. Yo, should you practice art? Or should art be your practice? I had a question, so I asked it. Not to anyone specifically, but to my inner God, you know? The one that's gonna be a master. The one that's more than a rapper. The one that's an educator. The one that seeks enlightenment. He travels with concepts. He's got the mindset expansive. He understands that his time combined with travel and concepts makes his mind convex. Sort of like when you look at a brain scan. Straight off meditation, we was concaving until we had that eternal dialogue that created our dialect. Now we in distinct rooms of pure souls having them conversations. Synergy and combinations. You fly and we waiting. Indian style in the gold.